Now, one of the things that when we talk about drive failures, whatnot, is that we want to point out there's a big difference between corruption and complete drive failure. And here's an example, and this is one that a couple years ago, and I think Randolph West, if he's on the call, he came in and assisted with this one as well to take a look at it. But it was another medical group, and we do a lot of work with medical groups. And they called us, and they had a corrupt database. So we started looking into it to find out what was corrupt. And it turned out they had a RAID 50 drive array, and on that was the storage for the virtual machine, and it had multiple drive failures. And it turns out that there, with RAID, or even RAID 5 or RAID 50, that if you lose enough disks, eventually you end up with just a big hole in your data. And by a big hole, I mean like 20 to 25% of every disk was gone. And for big files, 20 to 25% of the file was gone.
Yeah, so another tough thing they had here is we put the client had no backup. They did have backups, but they were on the same RAID 50 array as the database.
Yep.
So they also had the same 20% hole missing out of them. And, this is another one. I don't know if this client had hot spares available and they'd eaten through a hot spare as well, but they had definitely eaten through 2 drives and not just the 1 drive.
And with this, basically, there was nothing we could do other than help them restore a backup from 6 months ago. But that was something that they were able to do on their own. And basically, 20% of every large file on the drive was missing. And when we look at that, that's not corruption. Corruption is areas where things are damaged that they can be repaired. But this is like the difference between a car getting a fender bender and doing a repair on that and your car being stolen. It's just gone at that point. Yeah, and basically there was no option from the database side to repair this in any way. And here's an example of what the SQL Server error log looked like.
Yeah, so if you can look at that, you can see the error log looks normal at the top and at the bottom, and there is just a whole bunch of some kind of garbage in the middle that's not error log.
And every single large file, and not even that large, but every single medium to large file on the disk had this type of problem with it. So this was install their operating system and rebuild from scratch based off of the situation they were in. So there's a lot of confusion with database corruption. And I think that if you've ever run CheckDB and got errors and you start Googling on some of those errors, you find a lot of people out there who maybe have not done as much corruption repair as they should have to be talking about it. And they come up with all kinds of things that they suggest or tell you about what's going on with that corruption. And one of those is that a full backup and restore of a corrupt database may help fix the corruption.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is false. And when you do a full database backup, it backs up the corrupted data with it. That is, we put it in brackets there. That's if you can take a backup. There's a lot of times where the backup just quits halfway through. And, one of the ways that we can prove this is if you so choose to try to the database corruption challenge, that's how we distribute the corrupt databases is we back them up.
Yeah, in the database corruption challenge, if you download many of the weeks of database corruption, you download a backup file, you do that restore, and it comes back corrupt. So doing a full backup and restore of the database will not help fix it. However, there are some situations where if you happen to have a full backup and maybe some transaction log backups, you might be able to replay the transaction log backups to get past the point in time where the corruption occurred if the storage holding the transaction log backups does not have the same corruption that caused the database to be corrupt to begin with.
Yeah, and the next one, and it's the first thought of many system analysts and system administrators is, hey, if I reboot the server, is it going to fix it?
Yep. And that's one of those things that if it was a file server, I'd say, yeah, kick it for a reboot and see if it works any better. But SQL Server, not the case. Once the file becomes corrupt, a reboot won't help it. And actually, it may make things worse, like a whole lot worse. And what I mean by that is that if you have corruption and your database is running, that's a bad spot to be in. But if you have corruption and your system is shut down and it will not start up, that's a much worse place to be in than corrupt and running.
Yeah, and we'll cover that more in the next few slides.
Yep.
So what about if I ignore corruption? Is it going to go away? Is it going to repair itself?
That's not going to happen. And technically it's unlikely, because if you have a regular process that maybe truncates a table and then refills it with some kind of a data warehousing or ETL type process, yeah, you might get lucky. It truncates it, it goes away, and then you wouldn't have corruption. But other than that, without the act of like truncating a table or clearing out a table completely, it's extremely unlikely that ignoring it will make it go away. And in fact, ignoring it may make things a whole lot worse, because without fixing it and without knowing what caused it, you may get more and more corruption over time. So, yeah, be careful with what people are telling you on the internet, because a lot of those things may not be accurate on database corruption.